Barry Levinson and his wife Diana had been very kind since I'd been diagnosed with cancer and sent me beautiful flowers as well as a very generous gift voucher to a fancy spa in Santa Monica. One day he called and asked if I was up to working with him on a new script, and of course I said yes. It was another semi-autobiographical story along the lines of his first film, Dinah, and his other Baltimore stories, Tin Men and Avalon. This one was called Liberty Heights, was set in the 1950s during Barry's childhood, and dealt with the prejudice experienced by both African Americans and the Jewish community in a somewhat Gentile-dominated Baltimore. For instance, signs at the entrance to country clubs stating "No Jews, no coloreds, no dogs" were common. Sadly, these prohibitive and ridiculous signs existed until the early 70s. Since I was unable to travel to Northern California to work with Barry at his home, he dictated the story over the phone, and I took his words down in shorthand as usual. I then transcribed everything, naturally with a few of my own changes, and faxed the pages back to Barry. Yes, those were the good old days of fax machines. But we made it work, and the script was finished in about a month. Naturally, I couldn't work on the production of the film, which was disappointing, but I was delighted that Franja Rubinek, who I'd cast in Avalon, was given the role of the Jewish grandmother, alongside actors Ben Foster and Adrian Brody. Of course, she was wonderful. Unfortunately, her husband Israel, who also had a major role in Avalon, had died a couple of years earlier. Oh, he was such an amazing person, and greatly missed by Franja, their son Saul, and all who knew him. In between my chemo treatments, I continued to volunteer at Hollygrove, the children's home. I was there several days a week and really enjoyed playing in the sand, trying to decimate ants with the heat of the sun and a magnifying glass. Please don't judge me. Blame it on the boys. Anyway, just being in the moment with these needy children gave me a lot of joy, and I feel was a big part of my healing. Simply turning up for these kids made a difference in their lives, and in mine too. I actually received the Volunteer of the Year award during this period for my consistency and for organizing drama and craft activities, as well as creative writing exercises for the children. In those 6 months, when I was having various chemo treatments, I was appointed artist in residence and was responsible for implementing Hollygrove's Media Center, with heavy emphasis on reading and creative expression. I'm very proud of the fact that I was able to guide these troubled children into producing 2 illustrated books of poetry, which I feel greatly increased their self-esteem and was an essential element in their need to be heard. When songwriter Joy Huber was diagnosed with stage 4 cancer at the age of 33, she didn't get angry or depressed, but chose to deal with it in a positive manner. A bit like me, I suppose, although she was a lot younger. One of the things she did was put a book together entitled Cancer with Joy, about her approach to her diagnosis. I heard that she was asking for joyful cancer stories from others, and I was happy to contribute my wonderful experiences with the children, as well as the joy Pumpkin had brought me. I'm pleased to say that my chapter was accepted, so I'm in the book. The subtitle of Joy's book was How to Transform Fear into Happiness and Find the Bright Side Effects, which I thought was brilliant, and what a concept. You know, it's so easy to go down the fear route, and who wouldn't when handed a cancer diagnosis? But to look on the bright side is definitely not the usual route. For myself, I regarded it as just another life experience, and I was determined not to let the diagnosis define me. I never claimed the cancer. It was never my cancer experience. Even though in the beginning I'm sure I said I've got cancer, I then became more conscious when discussing my journey. And I'd say, I'm going through the cancer experience. Going through being the operative words here. Cancer was the tunnel, and I was going to come out the other end. Later, I purposely refused to say that I was a cancer survivor. I was a thriver. An interesting thing happened in a Hollywood restaurant I'd gone to with my friend Sandy and her 7-year-old daughter, Tallulah. Warren Beatty and Annette Bening were also in the restaurant. And Sandy said, "Oh, look, there's Warren and Annette. Why don't you go over and say hi?" Sandy knew, of course, that I'd worked with Warren, and I told her how much I liked him. Then she asked if I could take Tallulah to the bathroom, which meant that I would have to walk close to Warren's table. Sandy was determined that I speak with him. I purposely looked away from the stars table and paid attention to Tallulah, but on the way back I couldn't help avoid Warren. I had no intention of interrupting his dinner with his wife, but as I got closer to his table, he looked up. "Marie!" He stood and hugged me, while Annette continued to eat her dessert. "How are you?" Warren asked. And then, instead of simply saying, "I'm fine, thanks," I said, "Do you really want to know?" I think I was as surprised by the words coming out of my mouth as Warren was. Yes, of course," he responded. "I'd been diagnosed with breast cancer." "Oh dear, I'm so sorry, Marie." And then he went on. "Now, tell me, is it estrogen receptor negative or positive?" I was slightly taken aback by his question. Negative," I blurted out. Then he wanted to know which hospital I was going to and asked if I was happy with my oncologist, Dr. Lieber. I couldn't believe all the attention he was giving me. And then I was feeling guilty for disturbing his dinner, something I didn't want at all, which I told him. He then went on to say that if I needed any recommendations, he'd be glad to help. He hugged me again while I thanked him. I nodded at Annette, who smiled, and I made my way back to Sandy's table, where Tallulah was devouring a gooey dessert of her own. "Oh my God, Marie, what on earth were you talking about?" Sandy was very curious. I told her briefly, and we were both impressed with the interest and knowledge Warren had about cancer, but really shouldn't have been surprised, because he was and is an extremely smart guy and knowledgeable about a great many things. He's sensitive too. After 6 months of 3 different types of chemotherapy, my oncologist said he thought I might need a full mastectomy, but wanted me to get a second opinion. Although I told him that I trusted him, he insisted that I go to see one of the top specialists at the City of Hope Cancer Center in Pasadena. This specialist confirmed that I did need a full mastectomy. There was a reason behind it, because I'd opted to do radiotherapy before chemo, which is not the normal order. Usually chemo comes before radiation. There was no way of knowing how effective it would be. "If you were my wife, sister, or daughter," the specialist said, "I would most definitely be recommending this surgery." Well, I was pretty much ready for anything by now, so wasn't freaked out at the thought. It was all part of the process. I insisted on another surgeon, though, and instead of the very insensitive Dr. Hutchinson, I now had Nora Hansen, who was absolutely marvellous. When she was examining me and describing the procedure, she said, "Of course, you'll also need to see a plastic surgeon." I looked at her quizzically. Surely I'm not that ugly, I thought. For the reconstruction. Up to then, I didn't realize that I would be given a new breast. Oh, I don't want to go on and on about all of this because I'm sure you've heard enough. But just to tell you that a few months later, the Beverly Hills plastic surgeon had created a new breast from my stomach. Several friends offered their belly fat since I didn't have a lot to spare. But unfortunately for them, it wasn't allowed. Next time, home in a Rolls Royce and my own private chef. Thanks for listening.